This is Twit.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. IT Pro from ACI Learning offers binge-worthy cybersecurity and IT training in everything your team needs to advance your IT learning. Use code TWIT30 at checkout for 30% off a standard or premium IT Pro membership. Visit go.acilearning.com/twit to learn more.
We are going to kick things off with Google, and this time we're not talking about bidets going away. Instead, we're talking about Google following through with some other cost-cutting measures. This time, we're going to get rid of some micro kitchens at Google. So I have been, I'm sure at least some of you have been on Google's campuses before. Yep. And while you're there and, you're visiting, if you have a Googler who works there and you get to go around, there are these little places that you can stop and grab a beverage or grab a muffin or grab something to eat or drink. And Google seems to be kind of rolling back on the spending on these different sort of micro kitchens. And I mean, it makes sense. They just announced that they were going to be laying off even more workers. And I think some employees were particularly surprised that this was happening at Google, kind of thought they were holding their breath for a while, thought that maybe Google had pushed through that and got past any concerns about needing to, or in their mind, needing to let people go. And so these cost-cutting measurements came into place at the same time that we've seen some layoffs. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious for all of you, I'm curious to hear your perspective on these sorts of perks that exist at companies, because it has often been looked at as a means to not pay people what they're worth. And
I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, go ahead.
The company I used to work for, we had nice little perks like this at the different facilities. And it was good where it was nice to have it there and have some convenience and not necessarily have to worry about going out of the facility to go get lunch and pay extra for stuff that you really don't want. And you had people right there in the house, if you will, that could take care of those little knick-knack needs or what have you. But then at the same time, it also could indirectly encourage working 12 hours like it's like 8 hours, So it was sort of, a double-edged sword. Now, granted, there were times, because in the IT world, you're going to have some long days. You just, it get like that at times. I can't say that the company that I previously worked for really encouraged us to do that, but it was nice that when we had those long days, we had those extra little perks right there in-house. Mm-hmm. But I also get the argument of, why don't you just pay these folks more? And yeah, I agree. Most people want more money more so than they want perks, right?
He says, as he picks up his sparkling water and takes a sip, got out of the fridge here.
Free pizza from
literally. I missed watching Windows Weekly last week because I was enjoying the Twit sponsored lunch.
Well, it seems like after the long working from home period, maybe those perks don't seem as important to people as actual money. And I guess there's that like shared sacrifice idea that if you're laying people off, everyone should suffer a little. The people making on the low end of the totem pole and on the high end. Did Google really signal anything at the top that they were doing anything about compensation? I think it's great when the thing a company says is, I think Amazon did this, maybe it was 20 years ago. It's that long ago, when they had their first glitch in earnings after they opened a bunch of warehouses prematurely and then closed them and then later reopened them again. And it was, there's no longer going to be Advil or something like that in the break rooms. And you're like, man, you should stock more of that. Like that's the wrong decision. But it does feel like it's not rearranging deck chairs, because Google is not in any terrible financial situation. It's more like they had to do something symbolic, but why? I don't know. This looks like, I'm starting to get these things. Every company is pinching its users a little bit too. And I wonder if this is part of the same trend, just off to the side. I just got a notice from the parking app that we use for parking meters in Seattle. I forgot, it's pay per something, right? Pay to park or something like that, or pay by phone. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we might start charging you in some areas for SMS. And I'm like, gosh, that sounds very Elon Musk. Oh, SMS is eating up tens of millions of dollars. And I'm thinking all the little freebies as users and all the freebies you had inside a company as a worker, are the company sort of trying to claw those back after many years of providing things because they're trying to chew off some of the expenses that are fixed, and they want to get off their ledgers.
Having worked at magazine companies, and I have a book coming out in November, I might as well mention it on the air, called Magazine for Bloomsbury. I recount some of the culture that I went through there. And at Time Inc., when I was there on closing nights, because you'd work until 3 a.m. and you were really tired and you had to do all kinds of stuff. So they catered dinner. That was one. They had free wine and beer. They had Pepperidge Farm cookies all day. And you got a limousine ride, not a limousine, but a dark car ride home if you worked past 8 o'clock, which means everybody worked past 8 o'clock to get the car ride home, even in the Hamptons, right? And then I worked at Condé Nast, where they had, and also at Time Inc., if you were at Time magazine, a steward in a white coat would take around the liquor trolley. Honest to God. And if people where I was, which we didn't have that because we were day class A, but all the senior editors and up, I was not a senior editor, the senior editors and up could requisition booze for their credenzas. Now, one, they had an office. Number 2, they had a credenza. Number 3, they had booze in it, paid for by the company, right? And we all, of course, we had expense accounts like crazy. We'd go out to lunch. There's one guy I worked with people who would go to Bloomingdale's and say, that couch, I think that's about 25 lunches. And he'd have fake receipts for the lunches, and that's how he'd do it.
Oh, my God.
Condé Nast. We had a beautiful Frank Gehry designed cafeteria, which was subsidized, and also cars anywhere, also flying first class, all this. The point of all this, at some point comes the moment when the piper comes for payment and you don't have the same old culture you had, and you get ripped apart properly. Well, in the old days, they lived like kings and queens, and now look what happens to them. So I think that's part of the problem too, is that it's part of the hubris of something. You're absolutely right. It's one way to get people to work all hours, but it's also a way to say, look how wonderful and special and privileged we are, like other jobs and other companies, and it comes back to roost.
I'll tell you something funny that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, sir.
Well, something funny about Amazon, I want to say, often we criticize big tech companies for the bad things they do. And one thing they did in the community is Amazon, before the pandemic, was building massive amounts of office space in downtown Seattle. And they intentionally talked about it, and it was true, I know people who worked there, that they underbuilt the space that you could eat inside the buildings because they wanted to support this neighborhood that they were essentially overrunning. And they helped subsidize some food businesses to come in there. They invited food trucks in. They really wanted workers to leave the building. I mean, it sounds so strange now in the 2020 plus world. They wanted workers to leave the building and go sit in crowded restaurants and support, pour the money back into the community. And it also meant, though, and I'll say this again for them, they didn't want people to work through lunch. They wanted them to leave the building for lunch. They didn't want people to necessarily have this uninterrupted, I'm at my desk. I mean, people did that, of course, but they encouraged people. And if you went out there, I'd occasionally make the mistake of on a weekday going into the South Lake Union neighborhood of Seattle and walking around, and everybody has an Amazon lanyard. I'm like, it's actually working. And it was, again, before pandemic, it meant, I don't know, probably tens of millions of dollars a year is being poured into that. So arguably, Amazon built inside a city, and Google built in a suburb, and a lot of the .coms built in a suburb. So they did provide amenities because they didn't want someone to take like 2 hours to leave the campus, drive somewhere, park, eat, get their dry cleaning. They're like, no, we want to recapture that. But also, if you read about Palo Alto and some of these other places, they were overrun at times where it's just there's literally no seat in any restaurant, no place you could go. The reverse problem is happening now, of course, but there was an intent of a time that's gone by that's not coming back.
Wow. See, there's so many aspects to this, right?
Cult.
Yeah. That I guess that can be sort of the offshoot of it, is you do then get. I was reading a book, and in the book, it was actually kind of talking about, this was a fictional cult, but essentially the people, as they moved up in the cult, then to become like a higher member, you had to, this is grisly, but have your tongue removed. And the conversation surrounding that was,
Jesus, what do you read?
It's a it's a fantasy book.
Yeesh.
But the point is,
especially weird. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm going to say this one. Especially weird for a guy who makes his living by talking, reading a book for pleasure.
It's a strategy.
Ripped out.
I don't know. Strategy book he's reading.
Self-hating to me.
This might be.
But keep going.
I promise I'm getting to the point here. The point is, without the ability to communicate, then they only can rely on each other for any sort of commiseration, but they can't talk to each other about it. They don't have the ability to go elsewhere and talk to other people. It creates this sort of reality distortion field where they all exist in the same place and they have no means of reaching out. They also can't eat with other people. And so that is one of the main ways that human beings, as just what we are, kind of connect with new people or connect with others. My point is, in talking about sort of these groups where you end up eating together, even if that wasn't the original intention, you do start to get this sort of groupthink attitude that does lead to, oh, well, this person stayed later. I'm going to stay later. We're all going to stay later. We're all in this together. We're all a big family. We're all working on this. And so I wonder if over time, Glenn, where you kind of talk about perhaps in the beginning where it was about, okay, we're in the suburbs. We also have to make sure that we keep the city council happy, that we're not getting people who live here complaining because, our workers overrun the community. But then they also see the benefits. They start to see the benefits of having these employees working and eating and I don't know, doing laundry together, and how that can kind of lead to this culture where you just work.
It is surprising that we don't have employee dormitories in America, though. I mean, that is common in many other countries and many industries, including white collar, depending on the country you're in. And I am sure so many companies have thought about, like, let's just build housing for like 1,000 people and you will live and work in a set of connected tunnels.
Isn't that common in Asia?
Well, I think that's in Shenzhen, right? Where Foxconn has a huge campus where they offer living. And although to its credit, within the context of many other things, apparently the living conditions are generally pretty good compared to what someone could afford on that salary in the same places. So there is some aspect, it's a patriarchal or a benefactory, whatever you call it. It's like a beneficial oversight of someone's life. I don't know.
My God, I'm sorry. I know I'm concentrating on the wrong thing.
Oh no, here we go.
But when you don't have a tongue, how did they get nourishment? And did this go into gross detail that maybe
No, it
can get nourishment without a tongue, sir.
I guess you do what Ant does, which is drink protein shakes.
Oh, okay.
Straw-based culture.
I'm just going to reveal the book because I feel like everyone's just going to be thinking about that for the rest of the episode.
All we can think about
the Dresden Files, which is about a sort of modern day wizard. There's a group of people who essentially work for fallen angels. And in order to make it up into the higher rungs of working for these fallen angels, they have their tongue removed. So,
oh my goodness,
it's so effing weird.
It's very weird.
Let me change the subject if I may.
Please take it away from
the other cutback at Google.
Mr. Jarvis, you mentioned privilege a few minutes ago, and it really made me think back with my own personal experience. Prior to working at that nice company that I used to work for umpteen years, I had some pretty crappy jobs when I look back at them. I remember digging graves with my dad.
Really?
Gee.
I remember doing crappy jobs like that. And so being in the position of being in a nice, beautiful facility that was air conditioned, number one, it was an air conditioned facility. I didn't have to wear ratty, beat up clothes because I knew they wouldn't get dirty and stuff like that. Had coffee machines and a gym and a shower and all of this beautiful stuff right there. It opened my eyes and I was like, I can get used to this. I'm keeping this job. That was sort of the thought that I had. It's like, this is a privilege now. And I don't want to let it go. But yet the other side of that is those 12-hour days could have added up. Mine didn't add up like that, but they could have for some people.
Isn't that always sort of the balance that I think, because I can remember I worked for my school district back in Missouri. And so during the summers, they would have jobs if you were, of age to be able to work for the school district. I would climb up onto the top of the roofs of the school building during the summer and like the hottest time of the year and paint the roofs with this metallic
I did that
paint.
too, dude.
You did that?
Yes.
Yes.
I've done that too.
Goodness.
I've done commercial building roofing with asphalt and some with that nasty rubber tar. And I've done all that stuff too in the summertime. So
yeah. And you have then whenever you do move into something else and it does feel like it's so much of a shift in everything. And so I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I totally get where you're coming from in terms of trying to find perspective in all of these things, because of course we know suffering is relative and the perspective does matter there. And you also don't like, having come from something like that, working that way and finding appreciation in the job that you have, you don't want to sort of discount other people's experiences in their suffering in that job that you have, because it's hard.
And you should also point out a lot of these companies too, they have tiers inside the companies too. So Google's had all these issues with some people do get the free lunches and others are in different buildings with different colored badges and they don't have access to it. So there's hierarchies within the hierarchies too. And the lowest paid workers get left out of it. Yeah.